I was just tightening the last bolt on the new security gate when I heard the screech of tires spinning too fast on gravel. Looking up, I saw a beat-up white SUV barreling toward me, kicking up dust like a sandstorm. Out of the driver's seat jumped Linda, decked out in hiking boots, neon leggings, and a fanny pack that seemed to be armed for battle. She charged toward the gate, red-faced and panting, as if I had just committed a war crime. Before I could say a word, she whipped out her phone, pointed it at me with trembling hands, and barked, "You're being recorded. You're illegally blocking a historic trail." Her voice cracked halfway through the sentence, making it sound even more ridiculous. I stood there in my work boots holding a wrench, confused but trying not to laugh as she shrieked into her phone. 911. Yes. I'd like to report a man for hostage-taking. He's trapping citizens on a public trail. It would have been funny if it wasn't so insane. Within minutes, 2 sheriff's deputies were racing down the dirt road toward us, lights flashing, sirens wailing, while Linda waved them in like she was directing fighter jets onto an aircraft carrier. I knew then that this was not going to be an ordinary Saturday. The deputies barely had time to unbuckle their seat belts before Linda sprinted toward their cruiser, flailing her arms like an inflatable car dealership figure. "He's blocking access to the historical trail," she screamed, jabbing a finger at my perfectly legal, freshly installed gate. "People are stuck back there without water, without food." "He's a monster," she cried dramatically, spinning a story so wild that even the deputy had to squint at her in disbelief. Meanwhile, I calmly walked over, wiping my hands on a rag, and pointed to the 6 massive private property signs bolted to every fence post. The older deputy gave me a long look, then slowly turned back to Linda. "Can you show us exactly which public trail you're talking about?" he asked carefully, like he was dealing with someone who might snap at any second. Linda puffed up like a toad and stomped right up to the gate. In a move that seemed ripped straight from a bad comedy movie, she grabbed the locked gate, tried to yank it open, slipped, and tumbled backward into the dirt, losing a sandal in the process. For a moment, everything froze. Then, as Linda struggled to untangle herself from a low bush, the younger deputy coughed to hide a laugh. Linda wasn't deterred. She scrambled to her feet, still barefoot on one side, and launched into a high-speed rant about how this land belonged to the people, and how she had a personal connection to this trail because her great-uncle's friend's cousin's roommate supposedly rode a horse through here back in the 1960s. I stood there blinking, trying to process the mental gymnastics she was performing. The deputies exchanged a look and asked if I had any documentation proving the land was private. Wordlessly, I went to my truck, pulled out a thick file folder, and handed them the deed, the city's land ownership records, and a fresh surveyor's report. Everything was certified, dated, notarized, and laminated because I knew better than to underestimate local troublemakers. The deputies spent all of 5 minutes flipping through the papers before one of them politely told Linda, "This is private land. This isn't and has never been a public trail. You need to leave." You could almost see the steam come out of her ears. Her face turned a shade of purple I thought only existed in cartoons. "I'll have your job," she screeched at the deputies. "I'm friends with the mayor." Both officers looked unimpressed. "That's great," the older one said dryly. "But unless the mayor can rewrite property laws, you're trespassing." At that, Linda changed tactics. She pulled out her phone again and started snapping photos of my property, my gate, my truck, even the deputies. All while muttering to herself, "I'm going to the Historical Preservation Society. I'm going to the news. You'll be sorry. You'll all be sorry," she hissed, backing away like she was starring in a soap opera. I almost expected dramatic music to start playing. She stomped off toward her SUV, still shoeless on one foot, got in, slammed the door so hard it echoed across the valley, and sped off without looking back, leaving behind a cloud of dust and one very sad sandal. I thought maybe that would be the end of it. But deep down, I had a sinking feeling that Linda wasn't done. Not by a long shot. People like her don't back down after one defeat. They double down, dig trenches, and come back swinging. Sure enough, within hours, flyers started appearing around town. "Save our trail," they screamed, complete with a badly photoshopped picture of me looking like a cartoon villain twirling a mustache. The claims were absurd. I was imprisoning hikers, destroying community heritage, and stealing public resources. It would have been hilarious if it weren't clear she was dead serious. I sat on my porch that evening, sipping sweet tea and staring at the new gate, watching the sun set over my land. I had no regrets about putting the gate up. If anything, I was more determined than ever to protect what was mine. Linda had declared war, and she had no idea what kind of fight she just picked. I smiled to myself, knowing she had already made her first mistake. She had no clue how airtight my ownership rights were. How every document was perfectly in order, or that I had recorded the entire encounter, including her dramatic 911 call and her clumsy fall on my security cameras. As night fell and the cicadas began to sing, I chuckled softly. If Linda thought the gate was a problem, she was about to find out she had only scratched the surface. The real battle was just beginning, and I was more than ready for it. By Monday morning, it was clear that Linda had spent the entire weekend scheming. I woke up to find neon-colored flyers duct taped to my mailbox, my fence posts, even the community bulletin board at the gas station. Each flyer was a disaster in design and a masterpiece in lies. In giant red letters, they screamed about an evil land baron who had destroyed the historic community trail and imprisoned families and children behind steel gates. She even included a dramatic low-angle photo of my gate taken at sunset, probably hoping it would look more sinister. The real kicker was that she had pasted drone photos of my land. Photos she definitely did not have permission to take or publish. I peeled one of the flyers off my truck windshield and shook my head. If Linda thought bad clip art and buzzwords were going to scare me, she was about to get a very painful education in how the real world works. Later that afternoon, I heard shouting near the back of my property. I took a walk down the trail, phone in hand, just in case, and found Linda and about a dozen of her new followers gathered at my gate. They were an odd bunch. A few retirees who looked like they hadn't hiked in years. Some teenagers who clearly just came for the drama, and one guy with a megaphone yelling incoherent slogans. They had tied colorful balloons to the fence, taped handmade posters on the gate, and even set up a little folding table with a petition on it. Linda, standing at the front like a general addressing her troops, spotted me and immediately pointed. "There he is," she shouted as if she had caught a war criminal trying to escape. The crowd turned to me, a mix of awkward shuffling and weak fist pumping. I leaned casually against a fence post and raised an eyebrow, waiting to see what flavor of crazy Linda would unleash today. "We demand you open the trail," Linda shrieked, waving a clipboard at me like it was a sword. I calmly asked her if she had brought any documentation proving that it was a public trail. She blinked a few times, clearly not expecting to be challenged. Then she rattled off a speech about common law access rights and historical community traditions, peppering it with made-up legal terms that sounded impressive but meant absolutely nothing. When I asked if she had a lawyer or any official backing, she launched into a long-winded story about how she had connections at City Hall. I nodded, pretending to be impressed, and then told her very politely that unless she had a court order or city mandate, she was trespassing. Linda's face twisted in fury. She ordered her little army to stay put and began filming herself, narrating dramatically as if she were reporting live from a disaster zone. I decided it was time to play my hand. I smiled pleasantly and said, "You might want to read the fine print on those flyers you posted." Linda looked confused, so I pulled out my phone and showed her an email from my attorney. It was a cease and desist letter already prepared, citing unauthorized use of drone imagery over private property, unauthorized distribution of said imagery, and defamation. Linda's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. I told her she had 24 hours to remove every single flyer, retract every public statement, and issue a public apology or face a lawsuit that would bury her so deep she'd need a trail map to find her way out. The crowd, sensing that things were not going according to plan, started to murmur and drift away. A few of the more reasonable ones quietly packed up their signs and balloons and slipped off down the street, pretending not to know Linda at all. Linda, realizing she was losing her audience, went into full meltdown mode. She screamed that she would sue me for emotional distress, that she would petition the governor, and that she would march right to the Supreme Court if she had to. I didn't bother responding. I just turned around and walked back to my house, whistling a happy tune, while Linda's voice grew fainter and fainter behind me. By the next morning, most of the flyers had disappeared. I imagined Linda had spent a long, miserable night driving around with a step stool and a roll of duct tape remover, desperately trying to undo her mess. I thought maybe, just maybe, this would be the end of it. Maybe Linda would realize she was outmatched and slink away into the background. I underestimated her again. A few days later, I was woken by honking and shouting outside. I threw on a shirt and ran to the front porch. There once again was Linda, but this time she had brought reinforcements. She had organized a public protest at my gate. There were about 20 people milling around holding poorly spelled signs with slogans like "Open the public trail" and "Free the path." Some even camped out with lawn